I'm really happy to have you. Now, I've done a lot of work recently on Clinton's political ideology, known as the Third Way, which suppresses the left, occupies the center ground, and fills the ideological holes with austerity and warmongering. Your most recent book may intersect and overlap with some of this work. Tell me more about your work on Clinton.
Sure. Well, yeah, the book, it's just been published by Clarity Press. It's called Warmonger, How Clinton's Malign Foreign Policy Set the U.S. Trajectory from Bush 2 to Biden. And well, the book starts, the first couple chapters look at Clinton's tenure, look at his background, excuse me, and his tenure when he was the governor of Arkansas, and a lot of shady things that went on, including what I learned was that Arkansas was central to the Iran-Contra operations and the smuggling of arms to the Nicaraguan Contras out of Mena, Arkansas. And Clinton helped cover that up. And he had a long background, actually, connection to the Central Intelligence Agency, going back to his time when he was a student at Oxford. He was the roommate of Strobe Talbot, who came from a CIA family, and the two were sent on a mission into Russia to smuggle the memoirs of Nikita Khrushchev. And I use those chapters to kind of set the groundwork for Clinton's presidency and his foreign policy, because here was really somebody who was intricately connected to the intelligence establishment and supportive of the military industrial complex from the beginning of his career. Although I think he hoodwinked liberals, and he created this kind of image of himself as somebody who'd been part of the anti-war movement. Although in the Vietnam era, although really it's believed that he was an informant in the anti-war movement. And this was just kind of facade, and he used that to advance very militaristic policies. Particularly at the end of the Cold War, he packaged American wars as being needed for humanitarian intervention, like in the Balkans, to stop human rights abuses and genocide, when really the United States was on the side of major human rights abuses. But this is how wars were packaged in the Clinton era, and that set the trajectory toward the present day.
I mean, some of the things you said there were just so interesting to me because one of my series also ends up looking at the Iran gun smuggling side of the Iran-Contra affair and how certain elements of the CIA set that up, and including Jeffrey Epstein, Stanley Pottinger, who ended up being one of the Epstein victims' lawyers, was central to it, along with Adnan Khashoggi and others. It's really interesting that operation comes up over and over again with these people. How did Clinton use CIA cutouts such as National Endowment for Democracy to further the deep state agenda?
Yeah, Clinton championed the National Endowment for Democracy was set up in the 1980s to carry on overtly what the CIA had been doing secretly, basically propaganda and supporting dissident groups in countries that the United States targeted for regime change. So he was a supporter of the National Endowment for Democracy, whose budget grew during the 1990s. And a key operation they carried out was in the Balkans in the regime change against Slobodan Milosevic. He had been the target, and Milosevic had tried to keep the Yugoslav Federation together, and he was one of the last socialist leaders in Central Europe. So he was, the target of the U.S. bombing during the Kosovo War, and the U.S. had supported separatist elements and the Croats and Muslim to try and break up the Yugoslav Federation. And then the kind of coup de grace with the NED went in to support an opposition movement and youth protesters against Milosevic. And this swayed the election, I think it was 2000 or 2002 election in Serbia. And he was defeated in that election. And there were these mass protests against him. And it was framed as this great human rights crusade and youth pressing for change. But really, it brought in a neoliberal leader who basically catered to U.S. interests and allowed for, U.S. set up a big military base, Camp Bondsteel, and was trying to reorient those economies along neoliberal lines. So it didn't really, I mean, Milosevic had his flaws, so they can, play on some of Milosevic's flaws and autocratic tendencies. And this is what the NED does effectively. They pick on countries where there are problems. Some of these leaders have autocratic features, and there are legitimate movements of protest or youth who want change, but they will co-opt and infiltrate those movements to advance their own agenda and to try and get in power leaders who serve American interests in the world.
That is an amazing answer. You're very good at your research, obviously, clearly. When do you think Clinton was officially recruited by the CIA?
I believe he was recruited when he was a student at Oxford, and this is not my assessment. This was admitted by Meyer Jr. I think he had a little too much to drink, and he was interviewed by a journalist with Harper's Magazine, and he said, "Oh, Clinton was with us. He was with the Three Bad Letters CIA," and he talked about this mission into Russia. Where they sent him and because Strobe Talbot, who became a key figure and Clinton's point man in the State Department on Russia when he was president, he came from a CIA-connected family and was a Yale Skull and Bones, and he was Clinton's room, and he was the Russian editor of Time magazine, which has intricate connection to the CIA. And yeah, so they were roommates at Oxford, so it may have been through him. But the two of them, yeah, were sent on this mission to smuggle out Nikita Khrushchev's memoirs, and that's something the CIA wanted because Khrushchev had denounced Stalin in harsh terms, so that was kind of cool for the U.S. in the Cold War propaganda war because they had all this dirt on Stalin, all the negative thing Khrushchev said about it. So the goal was to smuggle out his memoir. And yeah, Meyer admitted that the CIA funded that trip of Talbot and Clinton. And then Talbot eventually did translate some of Khrushchev's memoir in Time magazine when he became an editor. So it's believed from that point. And then, yeah, if you look at Clinton's record as governor of Arkansas, he was supporting this large-scale CIA covert operation to arm the Nicaraguan Contras after the Bolin Amendment had cut off congressional aid.
This may explain quite a lot because Joel Allen in the chat has asked a question many people ask about the Clintons. He says, what plausible explanation to the fact so many people who crossed the Clintons ended up dying suspicious deaths?
Yeah, there are a lot of suspicious deaths that I found in Arkansas. One was Jerry Parks. He worked on Clinton's, I believe, his security detail, and he had accompanied him on some trips to Mena, or this, and Barry Seal, they made a movie about this, American Made, with Tom Cruise. I mean, it's dramatized, but it is loosely based on reality. It was based on this guy, Barry Seal, who was one of the key pilots for these flights where they were shipping arms to the Contras and often bringing back drugs. And a lot of the illicit revenues are being laundered in local area banks. And some of those were owned by Clinton's friends, like Jackson Stevens, one of his top donors. And, Hillary Clinton was his lawyer at the Rose Law Firm. And then people who were in on this corruption, yeah, like Jerry Parks had a huge file on Clinton and about Mena, and then he died. Well, he was gunned down like mafia style before the 1992 election. And his wife, Jane Parks, had actually been the manager of an apartment complex where Roger Clinton, Clinton's half brother, had rented an apartment. And she saw all these sex drug orgies they were having. Roger and Clinton would come too and involved underage girls and cocaine. And, Roger was ultimately arrested for cocaine smuggling, and he got a very light sentence because of his connection with his brother, or half brother. So, yeah, there are a lot of a lot of that. And there's the whole case of the boys on the tracks. There were these two boys who seemed to have uncovered they were just out one night hanging around, and they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They saw one of these drug drops going down, and they got murdered. Then a lot of people associated with the case got murdered. And the mother, Linda Ive, the mother of one of the boys, really persisted in trying to uncover the truth about what happened to her son and who was behind the murder. Because they tried to claim the boys had smoked 20 joints and then sat on the train tracks. and that proved to be totally false. And Clinton had in his pocket this state medical examiner named Fahmy Malak, and he was a key person in these cover-ups because he would write fake autopsies to give a fake cause of death, and Clinton was actually bribing him, and he was totally corrupt, and people wanted him removed from his position, but Clinton kept him there. And actually, there was a close relationship between the two because Clinton had covered up for his mother. His mother was a nurse, Clinton's mother, and there were two cases of wrongful deaths when she was the nurse. She failed to do her duty properly, and she was either going to be subjected to criminal trial or at least a lawsuit. But Fahmy Malak covered up the circumstance of the death of these two women at the hospital, and this was very early in Clinton's tenure as the governor. So he always promoted and protected Malak, but he would cover up these crimes. And Linda Ives ultimately said that Clinton didn't pull the trigger on the death of her because it was found that he was shot in the head before he was run over by the train, and they had only smoked one joint or something. Yeah, she said ultimately after like 25-year investigation, very determined, good woman, and she said Clinton didn't pull the trigger, but he was behind this mafia that carried out the crimes, and he may have very well, have been the murderer. I mean, he was complicit in the death very deeply.
Yeah, we're running out of time here, but I tell you what, you're going to have to come back on this show because I got so many questions for you, and I know the chat's lit up with questions too. So I'll ask one here from Dark Commission, and we've only got about a minute left for this, but he says, just like in the UK, when did the US federal government become dictators rather than representatives of the people?
That's a good question. That's a hard one to answer. I mean, I think there's always been a problem with American democracy. I mean, going back to the founding of the country, the Constitution. You can read the book by Charles Beard, who wrote a iconoclastic view of the writing of the U.S. Constitution and how it favored the wealthy elements. And you had kind of rule by white men only, but. I mean, yeah, we've seen tremendous corruption. I mean, then there's the issue of money in politics. I mean, it's going back to the 19th century when you had the rise of large corporation and the robber barons. They were able to basically buy off politicians and kind of rig the political structure. So, in that sense, you had a kind of tyranny of big money for many years going back. But yeah, I see. I mean, I think things have gotten really bad in recent decades. So it's a hard question to answer as to when it, was totally destroyed. Yeah. But I mean, we see in this cycle, the Democratic Party, they didn't even have a primary. They just anointed Kamala Harris, the heir of Joe Biden, with no votes. So I mean, to me, that's a complete death knell of democracy.
Yeah, most